Hello and thank you. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. You could say that Keith dropped me right in it, basically, but it's a pleasure to be here, and I hope I can do justice. I'm normally accustomed to speaking to perhaps half a dozen people at the most, so it's a unique experience for me as well. So thank you. Um,
I'm slightly redundant because actually Anthony's far more interesting to listen to than I am. Can you hear the mic at the end? They can hear the mic, but they can't hear me, I think. How about that? No. About that? I think so. Absolutely not.
Yeah, they can both have one of these and make life easier.
There's one.
Test.
And can you take that one? Is that
Are they going to interfere?
no? Okay. So, glad we're back with you. And Anthony, over to you.
Most of you probably know your cars, and most of you probably got cars. So this is an Aston Martin project that I was working on at a company in Birmingham. As you can see, sometimes it's necessary to actually get inside the car to start modelling. Although quite unusual, it depends what the customer wants, whether he wants his car cutting up or not.
Do you want that moving forward?
Yeah, this is before I was a clay modeler, I was a woodworker and pattern maker, and this is a photograph of a Fiat in the Turin Museum. Now, I love this car. I think it's absolutely fantastic. A beautiful piece of mahogany, and yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's a beautiful piece of mahogany, and I can get quite passionate about it, really. Now, is that art or is it craft? Or is that when a craft becomes an art? I don't know, because I see that as an art object. How do you feel about that, Peter? Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to have opinions. If you start getting me on opinions, but it's quite interesting that we do have to declare an interest that we've been discussing some of this last night over a couple of glasses of wine.
Yes.
One of the things was about how beautiful the prototypes are as objects in their own right, and are they artworks in a way that the finished object is a commercial production? I think it sort of frees it up in that sense. And,
yes.
We're talking particularly about manifolds. You can imagine how exciting the night was.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
But it was for us. But in terms of the fact that the material itself has particular qualities, how do you feel about working with wood as opposed to working with clay? And in terms of that sort of object?
Yeah, it's strange, really, because I definitely have an affinity with wood. It's something about the way that it looks, the way that it feels, and although it was 1978 when I finished working in wood mostly, and working in the clay has been it's just different. Working in clay is just different. I mean, when I say clay, it isn't clay. It's of course it's wax. I have bought a sample of wax if anybody would like to see it afterwards, and I'll drop it on the floor over here. But to work in clay, to work in the wax is just something so different. And when I first started working in clay and left the pattern shop and to go work into the clay, I thought I'd died and gone to heaven, because you can't make a mistake because you just put more clay on. It's absolutely fantastic, wonderful. Whereas, of course, in wood, once you've cut it, it's too late.
think you've
So-
got, in terms of the next image, you've got how wood is used in the overall construction of the piece. If you
Yeah, this
talk
this,
a little more.
this is obviously before, slightly before my time. I would imagine it's somewhere in the probably the 40s, 50s, and this is how the sheet metal worker would make his prototype panels and fit them onto the model there. Even that, I think, is a thing of beauty. Yeah.
Um, but this is actually, this indicates a step change, because this is where it moves from the craftsman fitting the panels to
That's
the
right.
system of measurement. So
That's right,
if you
yeah.
talk us through,
Yeah.
what does that involve as a change?
That's a very early a measuring system. This is how it first went. The process first came from America, and this is how we measured the cars initially. I mean, it was certainly the same as this when I started in the 1970s. There was no digital measuring equipment at all. It was basically the aluminium squares, as you can see,
Okay,
which you used as a scriber.
yeah.
And yeah.
So the measuring tool itself is actually sitting along the middle of the bar at the moment. Am I correct with
Yeah,
that?
that's right. Yeah, you are.
So,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that would run over.
That can be moved up and down, moved along. Yeah,
Yeah.
along the X process. Yeah, yeah.
So this system is actually similar to some of the ways that sculptures were enlarged through a point system. So there's
Oh, is
a
it? Oh,
connection
okay.
with industry and the production of sort of the 19th century commercial multiple artworks. So that though we're talking about industry as separate from art here, they're actually using exactly the same process. So this is rather more on a square axis. Tended to use
Yeah,
tripods for that.
yeah.
I think it then moves on to a.
Well, I think that on the with the question of the tools, I think we talking to Keith Harrison. If you look at our the potter's toolkit and the modeller's toolkit, there's very little difference. So I presume that the roots are from the potting industry. Yeah.
So this, in terms of this drawing, this production image, is this the sort of thing that would come into the shop, or is this the sort of thing that goes out of the shop?
That's the sort of thing that you'd have hanging on the walls. And during because basically when you want to start to make a car, one of the first things that you need to know where the people are going to sit in the car. And so that's called a package drawing. And if you look at that, you'll see where people's heads are. So when would the first process would be to identify those head points in the proposed project, and then work the design around that. And so those will be hanging up constantly.
Right. So those are the things that taunt you during the experience.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Are you fitting that?
Those are the things that are generally ignored. Yes, initially. Yes, to make the car look nicer. Just to forget the engineering. Does it look nice? Does it look good?
So we were talking about tools. Here's the set of modelling tools.
Yes.
So the sculptors can feel at home. The ceramicists can feel at home.
I'm sure they can all relate to those, can't they?
Yeah. There's this, and I think the next slide actually shows the tool in action. Can you talk about just briefly about the issue of precision with this when you're doing this sort of work? What are the parameters? Are you working exactly to measurements, or are you working? You can see here it's an incredibly manual process.
Yes,
so,
it is. Yeah. Are we talking of now, or are we talking of
whenever you feel like? Let's at the moment we're talking about it in terms of the 1960s,
1960s. Okay. In the 1960s, it wasn't a very accurate process, really. and because we didn't know exactly where the shape of the car was, we could put at least 150 mil of clay on.
Okay.
So generally, it was quite feasible that you could have a car weighing 1.5 ton at least. Yeah.
Okay.
Where was I?
We were thinking about accuracy.
Yes.
So in terms of actually when you're modelling, how closely are you modelling to a set design that comes in? How much is the inspiration that you bring in terms of the modeller yourself, do you feel? Or at this point when you were working within the industry for those first.
Yeah,
take
well, and of
models.
course, when you're working within the design team, you follow the designer's instructions initially. So you start with his initial instructions. Perhaps the plan shape of the car would be first,
Right.
and the outline of the car next.
So if you were thinking of this sort of in terms of you've got an architect and a contractor,
Yeah.
who interprets and actually adds the real
Yes.
meat to it.
Yeah.
Is that the
yes,
feeling?
that's right. As you go along, so you'd put your input into it, and it'd either be accepted or it wouldn't be. Yeah.
It was always accepted.
No.
Yeah. Okay. So, right. So we're talking about tape drawing here.
Yeah, the tape drawing. Now, there are better examples in this, but let's start with this one because, again, accompanied by the engineering drawings, the designer will want to put a basic outline of his shape. So he uses tape. And he can make that tape drawing look just like a car. It's very, very interesting. There's a better picture further along, I think.
Let's see
Maybe.
if we can find it.
No.
So we're going to get, well, let's come back to the tape in a second.
Okay,
but
yeah.
we've got the tape drawing, and then we start moving to the construction. This is, tell me when I'm wrong, for
Current
heaven's sake.
construction, this is.
So you've got the underbody, which is a foam core.
That's right.
And then on top of that, you're putting a skin of the
clay
wax
right.
material.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's what you use for the finished surface.
That's right. Yeah.
That then provides
It's
the
probably
idea.
about 30 mil of clay on that, I would imagine, because this is now, so things are far more accurate, done with computer and milling machines. And
okay, so your interaction, do you create the original model, or does the foam piece arrive and you start working on that?
The initial foam arrives, yes, and then we would load the clay up.
Right.
And then it goes back onto the 5-axis machine to be milled, come back, and then that's when the hand process will start. Any modifications that the designer wants, you'll accommodate them.
Right. So now, rather than creating the whole piece from scratch, effectively, you're now working with the machine.
Yes.
That you identify where its failings are, and then remedially sort them out.
That's right.
So it does all the labour, and then you do the finessing.
Yeah, it's very good. Yeah, in comparison, I mean, we're talking about crafted industry, but there are ways in which the machine can be very beneficial.
Great. Let's. Right. So here we are. We're on the. This is the manual modelling. So are they making or are they measuring?
They're making. Yeah. This is using splines to control the surface, change the surface, and I think those are. Yes, it's just adjusting the final surfaces, really. Yeah.
So this is about working in very complicated 3D curves.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued about the extent to which, as a skill, how long do you feel it takes to learn this sort of skill before you've got a competent modeler?
It depends on where he started, really, because basically it's a hand skill, and I think like most crafts, if you can use your hands, then you're almost part of the way there, aren't you? And it's just adapting to the different techniques.
Right. So when you're saying about moving between techniques, you started off as a woodworker.
Yes.
You moved towards working with the clay.
Yes.
Do you feel that they're two aspects of the same thing, or were they two different skills that occurred at different times that you mastered?
Yeah, no, two different skills.
There's a same approach, but there's a specific, I can't say it now, specificity to the discipline in terms of you're a wood modeler.
Yeah, definitely. Yes.
So which would you say you're the most expert in?
The clay.
So you've become.
I wasn't a very good pattern maker, actually, I must confess.
An adequate pattern maker.
It requires different skills to some extent, because the pattern making, working in metal, wood, plastic, was very exacting, and you worked to thousands of an inch at the time. Whereas clay gives you a lot more latitude. You can there's a lot more freedom. which suited my personality basically as well.
So here we've got a scale model at the moment. So this is that a 1 to 12 or 1 to...
Yeah, I think it's a quarter scale model, isn't it? Yeah.
All right, okay, so that's 1 to 4.
Yep.
How important are these models in the industry in relation to the full-size ones?
Yeah, it depends which company you're working for. Some companies have more, would use scale models more than other companies. But the problem with the scale model is that you can't really see the proportion of the model. And so you get a nice model, but you're just getting a picture.
So it's effectively a maquette. It's not.
It's
really...
a maquette. Yeah, it's a maquette. That's right. Yes. Yeah.
So you're talking about these in terms of their limitations.
Yes.
Why do some people like them?
They're mostly used by students, actually.
All students, cover your ears.
It's probably used in training, and students are in a limited sense of they're made in studios.
That's interesting. Thanks. So again, we've got Porsche scale model here. Now I know this is one of the points about this. The piece is in 2 halves. For people who don't know, can you explain?
You see it? Yeah.
Can you explain?
I don't know if you can see, but the bottom picture's up against a mirror.
Yes.
So it's half a car. Now, sometimes we do that with full-size cars as well. So you might want to show, you'll have a mirror on both sides, so you can show 2 different cars. It's a way of saving money and getting the most out of what you've got at the time.
It's a good way of making it look really symmetrical.
Yeah, it is good, isn't it? Yes, yeah. The problem is if you don't get your mirror lined up exactly centre, it looks rather weird. But yeah.
That's good. Right, so there's Porsche styling. If we move on, this is where we want to start. Now, we've had a short conversation yesterday about some aspects of why Austin was an interesting place to work with.
Yeah.
Could you just reiterate a couple of those?
I lived right by the factory. Naturally, I was always late for work, as anybody is. And so 26,000 people worked there. And my father, who was of a few words, and I got my 1 GCE in woodwork, so and I thought, well, yeah, that's the way I want to go. And he said, well, go to the Austin, the money's good. So that was his advice. And so I went to be an apprentice at the Austin. Now, the one peculiar part of being an apprentice there was that I suppose there was about 200 apprentices in total, and everybody who went to be an apprentice there, be a commercial apprentice, a graduate apprentice, a trade apprentice, they all had to do 1 year's training, and did exactly the same training. They worked on lathes, milling machines, filing. And this is the conversation that we were having last night, wasn't it?
But the fact that this also included people working in the accounts office.
Of course, yes. Everybody. There was no exception, yeah.
I'm not sure you can imagine that in a company nowadays, that the accountants were expected to learn engineering. But we were having a discussion about whether, I mean, it's an open question, but how much does that affect the way the company actually operates and crossover between different parts in the company?
Yeah.
So this was this a model that was in production when you started, or soon after?
No, I worked on this model once the car had gone to once the Rover Design Studio moved to Coventry, and this was one of the cars that was done there. So yes, I worked on that one.
Right. Yeah, great. Okay. So what we'll do is, if we flash through the next few, if there's any particular points you want to bring up in terms of these, any moments from your life suddenly come flashing in front of your eyes.
Yes.
So again, we've got top left, we've got the split image on the car there again. Production piece. Let's flip forward. Right, so this is working
interiors,
on the interiors.
Yeah.
How different is it working inside the car than it is constructing what seems to be a bit like a vessel, the outside?
Yeah.
This is quite a different operation as far as
it is. That's right. Yes, that's very astute with that, Peter. Yes. And That required
You're too kind.
that required more the similarities of the pattern making because it was more in the detail.
Right. So in terms of scale,
Yes.
the scale shifts from the overall feel of the car
Yeah.
to the more manual sort of experience aspect of sitting inside this. When you're modelling these, do you sit in the driver's seat,
Yes,
feeling how
I
it
do.
looks?
And the passenger seat. Yes.
Backseat driver.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's intriguing in terms of the amount of interaction that the person who's designing this has. Do you think that's still the case today, or is it a case that has become less important in the design process?
No, I don't think so. Every year they will have these models exactly the same as they are now. There's no difference.
So despite the technological revolution,
there's obviously they can view it on very large screens, but they will still have the models
exactly the same.
exactly the same. There's no change. No. Yeah.
Thanks. Right. So we've got a bike. A different experience.
Yeah, another slightly different experience. Yeah, same process really. I mean, there's little difference really because it's just something else that's made in clay.
Okay, let's see. And well, these are coming on to the sports models. One question I did want to ask was, in terms of a luxury vehicle or a vehicle that's destined for a luxury market, is there a distinctly different aspect to the process, or from a modelling point of view, are all cars the same?
All cars are the same, identical. Yeah, there's no difference in the process at all.
So what are they paying for?
Oh, well, you have to ask other people that question.
But is it interesting from a sales point of view? People think of different car industries, but at this point in the design process, it's exactly the same.
Exactly the same. Yes, I mean,
operating.
Yeah, I worked for Bentley and Jaguar, and there's no difference.
But I do have to ask, who is the favourite?
Who's the favourite? Oh, Volvo trucks. That's
You heard it here first.
Volvo trucks. Is there anybody from Sweden here? My favourite country, Sweden. Yeah, wonderful place to work. Yeah.
So obviously the question is, why do you think that was? Why is that the one that you looked to as the most Was it most interesting or most enjoyable?
It was the most enjoyable. I suppose it's the most enjoyable country that I've worked in, really. Yeah, because it's just the way that the process is, the way that you're treated as part of the team, and very nice.
So it's not actually the modelling itself; it's actually being part of the group.
That's right.
Could you describe how it's different from working in the UK?
Well, I hesitate to say this, but of course the women are in charge in Sweden, so that makes a tremendous difference. Because there is this equality in the studio. Yeah, right. Everybody's equal.
So when you're saying everybody's equal in the studio, the modelling team, that implies the modelling team is quite different elsewhere. How do you feel where's the difference appear? Is it about hierarchy, or is it about respect for different approaches to making?
I think it's about hierarchy.
So
should I say that?
So a flat, it's interesting from the perspective of somebody who's actually experienced it, because we hear so much enthusiasm for different models of making, for the sole maker, working in teams, working in groups. But what we don't tend to hear is the experience of people who've actually had a long working experience in different models, and the one that they find works the best for them or with them.
Yes.
Yeah. As well as being productive, as well as being productive for you, do you think it helped the production of the model?
Probably made very little difference, actually. No, it's just the same, but you just feel better.
Quality of life
rather
than quality of product.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're on to so this is the foam model. Anything you want to mention here, or shall we skip on?
Yeah, I put the foam model in there just to show that there's all different sorts of processes involved. I mean, you can be milling in foam, you can be making a car in foam, or any other material. It makes no difference. So I just popped that one in. Yes. Everybody wants to know what happens to the car once they've been finished, and this is what happens. Yeah.
So a minute silence, and then we'll move on, I think.
Yes, they're just destroyed. It's because you can't keep everything. Obviously, the space required to keep all the different models is so that's what happens. And Jaguar did this video. It's on the internet actually, to show, because so many people said, "Well, what happens?" There it is.
So there's no great store of the past models of the.
There is a store, yes.
It's just empty. They've done this to them.
There's a store of the ones they want to keep. Yeah.
Ah, right. Okay. So, do you ever reference those when you're working on new models, or is there a trip to the vault to go and see what was most successful?
Sometimes they'll bring them out. Yeah.
Oh, so they bring them up to you instead?
Yeah. Sometimes I'll bring them into the showroom or into the garden outside. Cars are always viewed outside because to get the perspective. Right. So there's a nice viewing garden with nice plants, bushes, trees.
Right. So we've got design queue.
Oh yes.
So talk me through this.
Okay, that's exactly the same project as the first photograph.
So what's happening actually at this point? They're spraying over the clay model now at this point.
No, they're just modelling. It's just a poor photograph, really, isn't it? Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Looks like they're spraying on it, but
okay, let's move on. So so this actually shows the part-made model. This is a wooden frame.
This is the Jerwood project.
So this is not a car.
This is not a car, no.
Okay, so we've reached the Jerwood project now. I think this is an ideal time to explain in slightly more detail what the project entails and what your role is in it.
Okay.
So
yeah, that's fine. Yeah. I'm working with Keith Harrison, who's would you call him a performance artist? What would you call him?
Let's call him an artist.
He's an artist, yes. Professor Keith Harrison, sorry. He's a professor of ceramics at Bath University, yeah. And this is called the Jerwood project, and it's been, it's a project for the Forestry Commission. Keith's idea, I think some of you have already had this lecture this morning, or this talk this morning about this project. Okay. The idea was to make a car. Now, Keith also comes from near the factory, so he wanted to make something that reminded him was an echo of his childhood, and demonstrated the death of Longwich, if you like put it. Not quite as hard as that, but yeah, something along those lines.
Thinking of it as a way of memorialising the
yes, celebrating memorial, yeah. So the car was first made on a simple ladder frame chassis, and then egg box in the plywood, as you can see here now.
Okay, so.
And this is at Bourneville College in Birmingham, where they kindly gave us some space to do the project.
So the piece that you're making is a car that's modelled using the processes that you've learnt. The model is...
No, not at all, no.
Sorry,
it's nothing like I normally do. It's because the clay that I use is wax. It isn't clay, although all these in the models in the design studio, they're all called clay models. Of course, they're not. They're wax models. However, this is the real thing. This is the real thing, and this is the first time I've ever worked in ceramic clay. And Keith would go at 8 o'clock in the morning outside his mama's house. They're putting new sewers in or new electrics in, and they very kindly dug the clay up for him, and he would, and it's been very interesting for me to watch. Sorry, the Korean guy.
So the presentation that's out the front.
Yeah,
I've got a question for you about
because
that.
I've been watching him, his technique in kneading the clay, because Keith's been demonstrating to me. Potters here? Any potters here?
Nobody who's admitting to it. Oh yeah, right.
Yeah,
we're there.
Me too. Yeah, he's demonstrated to me the ram's head approach of when you knead the clay, and so basically he's been doing it this first thing in the morning, 9 o'clock in the morning, and then he comes in, delivers the clay, kneads the clay, plus all the bricks, plus all the stones, plus all the smells of the clay, and then I put the clay on the model. So it's a completely unique experience for me to work in a totally different material. I'm amazed at the shrinkage, really. I mean, it's staggering, the shrinkage, yeah. So the idea is, we weren't quite sure whether, because the clay's got to go up a ramp and drop off the ramp at the end, we didn't want the clay falling off before we ever got there. So we're keeping the clay wet with Hessian. So each night we cover the clay with Hessian to keep it stable, hopefully. So that's the first part of the project, yeah.
But the model that you're making, this is actually a specific model of car, isn't it?
It's a Rover. It's a Rover 75, which of course one of the last cars that was produced at Longbridge. Yeah. Apart from the Chinese, well, of course.
I think that sounds like a different story. So Joyride's the name of the project.
Yeah.
So this is a departure into a different world for you.
Completely different world, yes.
How's it been as an experience?
Very interesting. Yeah, I mean, fascinating. The one thing that I've learned is that it's all about money. I was shocked, actually, because, I mean, Keith said to me, he's won it was not one, but he applied for this project through the Jerwood organisation, and he was awarded the £30,000 to do the project, which I think he spent, actually, but we won't talk about that now, they said. And
let's keep that between us and the microphone.
Yeah. So, that's been a great surprise to me, really. Yeah.
So after having worked as somebody who's obviously been described as in industry,
yes,
the move to now being in the art world,
fascinating. Yeah.
The circumstances have changed.
Yes.
But is what you're doing, does that feel any different?
Yes, it does. Yeah, it does. Yeah.
In what way? Tell me, what's the...
Well, I want to do it again.
Open for offers.
Yes. Yes.
Now's
I want to do it
the
again.
time.
Yes. It's been a completely different experience and a good experience. Yeah.
So, in terms of the work that you're doing for this, and having seen the large piece that was being produced today, do you see connections between the performance piece that Kang Lee is making and the Joyride project that you possibly might not have seen before when you were working at Longbridge?
Well, I did say that I felt it needed wheels on, but apart from that, yes, yeah. Well, I suppose when I looked at him working on this, I wanted to have a go. That's the problem. I wanted to get up there and do it, you know.
Right. So obviously the maker in you is still there.
Yes.
You've not been put off there.
Yes. No.
That's great. I think this brings us to the to the conclusion. Apart from no cruising, because this is the background to the project.
Right, yeah.
If you want to explain that
the second part of the project. The reason that the Forestry Commission are sponsoring the project is due to the damage caused by joyriding in Cannock Chase. That's why it's Project Joyride. And as you can see, the signs are there.
So the commission itself was brought about by the background of the area as Longbridge,
that's
and
right.
also as the forests, the Cannock Chase as a special area.
The two parts,
brought together. Okay, and there is the end of Longbridge, one feels.
That's right. That's all that's left of it. Yes, very nice shopping area. Yeah.
So right. So this brings us on. Anything you want to particularly say about these, or are they...
No, there is some more stuff on.
All right, let's click forward a little, and we'll. All right, so this is.
That's a 1950s version of the clay process, actually.
So this is the connection between the piece that you're making today, and the manufacturing process that.
That's right.
There.
Yeah.
And here's the ramp.
Yeah, this is Keith's initial sketch work. As you can see, there's probably another better one that gives you a better idea.
Let's go through.
More of his work, yes.
And
this is the idea of the car. It's it's going to be launched 10 meters from the ramp off the top there. Now the idea is it comes down and crashes into the ground. From a I'm sure from an artist's point of view, you'd probably be fascinated by the process that he's had to go through, really. And this is what on the project he's had to do. The whole project is everything, even down to organising the toilets at the launch. Um, he set up a radio station so that when the car is launched, there'll be cars set either side of the ramp, and their headlights. It'll be and you'll be able to tap into the radio station. So he's had to apply for a radio station. He's had to organise all the insurance for things. It isn't something that I would expect from an artist, but I mean, it's. Yeah, I'm amazed really the amount of work that he's had to do. Um, everything. That's why he's not here today, of course.
So has this given you a different perspective, apart from the money, on what an artist is and does?
Yeah,
as a professional
completely.
person?
Yeah, completely. Yes. Yeah. Um, I was talking. I mean, obviously, I've spent long. We spent working together. We've spent lots of conversations with Keith, and of course, he said, "Well, because art is so different now." He said, "Because you don't have to draw to be an artist now." I don't know. Is that true?
So, example, obviously, this is a tree. Let's move on.
Yeah. Well, that's a very important tree.
Ah,
It's a
right.
very important tree because
Talk to us about it.
yeah, because the ramp has been made out of those trees.
Ah, right.
Yeah.
So this is very much an on-site piece.
Very much
all
so.
the way through.
Yes. Yeah.
That's the model.
That is the model because the red car that you saw earlier was the car that was digitized, and from that we produced this, and then the sections were taken from this. Yeah,
So that's then realised in
that's
these,
it. Yeah,
and onto
yeah.
the model itself, and the
There's
other.
the clay. Yes, that's right. Yes, yeah.
So this is
I'm-
good local Longbridge clay.
It is. Yeah.
Going back
I mean,
to it.
I suppose there were possibly lots of brickworks around the country. I dare say where clay was. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's quite a common thing around the place. I think the nearest one is about 6 miles down the coast that way.
Yeah. And I presume the local housing is made from that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think we all remember London brick, or those of
Oh
us
yes,
who've been
London
in the
brick.
area.
Yes.
That
Yeah.
historically, the houses in an area reflected the bodies of clay that were underneath them. So London brick's always yellow because it's London clay.
Yeah.
Nowadays we have an international system where things are shipped. Not quite
so
shipping, but they're moved around. Having said that, the area where I live had the bricks that made the S1 dam, so I'm not quite sure. It's not a new thing.
Oh.
So this is the assembly of the model.
Yes. Yeah.
Anything to say on that?
I think the one thing that I'd like to say is that I'm working at the college. As I say, the space has been given to us, and I'm working in between two areas. And the one area is the woodworking training area, and the other side of us is the mechanics, their training as well. And as I haven't been to college for
a couple of years,
a considerable time, yes, I'm absolutely amazed at the relationship between the students and the lecturers. I'm actually gobsmacked, really, because
it's not what you expect.
No. So that's again another learning experience, really, because.
But is this a relationship in a good way?
No, not at all. No. There's one student that keeps making chicken noises all day long. I mean, yeah, I can't.
So there's hope for art students yet. They might not be the worst ones,
Yeah.
I think that's the joyride. That's the poster.
That's right. Yeah.
Expressions of interest. That's the end of the presentation.
It is.
Can I ask you to join me in thanking Anthony for a really interesting talk? We've kept to time, but we do have time for, let's say, 3 questions. Will we have that with that? If we can pass the mic to you, the roving.
Do you have the mic? Take that one.
Can we take one? I mean, just to say thank you so much for that kind of detailed sort of view and insight into a kind of industrial model maker's practice. I mean, actually, there were a couple of things that came out there that struck with the session that I was in, particularly when you talked about the Scandinavian model and the kind of cooperative model that was going on. In my session, you know, talking about local global divides, this issue of placing designers with artisans came up in the so-called global south as ways to get them to kind of improve their product, as it were. And rather than having these designers parachute in to kind of work with artisans, it only ever seemed to really work, of course, when there was some sort of deep level of social interaction and the designers were really obliged to understand the kind of artisanal processes and the decision making was actually shared. So there were echoes there of some of the things you were talking about. Um, are there any questions for Anthony or Peter? Yes, at the back
Anthony, would I be wrong to think that there was more latitude for the modelers back in the 60s and 70s? You know, when there was less computerization and measuring, perhaps?
Yeah, you'd be quite correct. Actually, it was a far more enjoyable experience. Yeah, and then because there was a lot more freedom, a lot more interaction with the designers. Actually, um, with the digital process, things are far more refined. The role of the modeler has changed. I think it first changed when the studios became paperless studios, because up until then, um, the modeler could refer to the engineering drawing, but once that disappeared and it all went into CAD, then unless he'd got the skills, then he couldn't access it. So it changed his role.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hiya.
Mine's a bit of a basic question, but in terms of the clay wax that you use,
Yes,
is that something that you can reuse again? Because when I saw the picture of them smashing it
yes,
up,
you can do.
does
Yes,
it
yes.
it doesn't dry out? Then it's just reusable.
No, you heat it at 60 degrees. There's a billet in the back there actually, which I shall dig out literally. Yeah. And yeah, you can reuse it. Yeah, no. Obviously, after a while, it will denature, but yeah, generally speaking, yeah, you can use it 2 or 3 times.
And in terms of your experience with the clay and the wax, what were the major differences that you found? Was it the shrinkage and the drying out?
The one's cold, the other one's warm. That makes a big difference.
Hello.
Hello.
Absolutely fascinating. It's great to see craft in industry. What? How does the process move then from that modelling then into the fabrication of the tooling to actually press the metal? Is that the next stage, or would it have gone back to the design, you know, the drawing studio to make modifications? And
Yeah, once the clay model is finished, then it's obviously scanned and then it goes into engineering. Yeah.
and in the old days, would that have been an analog thing then? So people would be measuring your clay models and the tool makers.
Well, I'm glad you brought this subject up actually, because when we were getting to the final stages of the car, there was a large bench, the large sheet of aluminium, and on that aluminium, the design would be scribed. It was white aluminium, so it's quite an old process, I think. So that was how they in that's when I first started. That was how they get it down. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much.
There's somebody over there as well. The young lady over there.
Yeah,
Okay.
really enjoyed listening to that conversation. It was great.
I can probably be a bit more relaxed in the pub, but there you go.
Yeah, you got going. It was all right. One of my thoughts is that the visual identity of cars now I see as very generic, whereas when I saw cars as a kid in the 70s, there was a greater diversity
Yeah.
of shape and form. would you have an answer for why you see car
Well,
design going that way?
yeah, basically down to legislation and safety requirements, really.
The visual aesthetic hasn't come from the kind of automatic processing of the CNC kind of
No,
bit before. It's just
no.
it's
It's very difficult to make the cars
health and safety.
different. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was talking with Rod last night about debating whether that with the advent of electric cars, that perhaps you have an electric chassis, which would be similar for all cars, and whether a coach building will come back again, I don't know. I would think it's probably a possibility.
My question is a little bit politically charged. So you mentioned that your favorite place to work is Sweden,
Yes,
and the women run the scene there more.
I was just that was
That was a joke.
it was a light. It was a light. Yes,
Yeah, but I want to seriously ask about it. Like,
yes.
do you see that disparity here in Europe or America, and are there any steps taken to sort of bridge that gap? And I don't want to scandalize it because recently I know there was this Google memo that got someone fired, but I'm not doing that clickbait here, but just wanted to know your opinion about it on a serious level. Like,
Okay, well, a lot of my friends are modelers, both female and male. I don't draw any definition between the two. They're just modelers. And we're all treated as equals in those circumstances.
It's more just a note that I worked at Design Q as well,
Oh, good.
and
Yeah.
I was the first woman to work in the model shop there.
Yes.
Which is kind of depressing.
Nice.
But yeah, just so you know. But that's when they've moved away from clay modelling.
Yes,
so,
that's right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, there is still a massive disparity, I would say, just in that automotive sector.
Yeah, it's still a male-dominated industry. If this is what you're trying to say. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure it is. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Any more questions? We do have time for one or two more. Can I ask a question? We have a question over there.
I just wondered what you do now in terms of making for fun.
That's a good question. It's because this project finishes on as soon as I get back next Saturday. It's finishing. Yeah. What am I going to do now? I don't know. I'm going to look for the next thing to do. Actually, look for another project. Or no, I don't. No, because this is all it's large stuff, isn't it? Yeah, but yeah, I see myself. Yeah, I'm dabbling into sculpture. I think yes.
Can I just ask one question which wasn't very clear to me? Are you saying that the CAD-CAM process has completely made your role obsolete, or is there still a degree of interpretation where the systems can't quite draw the curves that are necessary? Or where does your role sit now? Or has it been completely obliterated, or does it still exist in some form or other?
It is possible to completely obliterate it.
Right.
Okay. But that's not what's happening because they're still taking apprentices on.
And why is that then?
Because I think at the end of the day, there's this. You have to have a model. It's just if you see something, what's the first thing you do when you see a model? If I see a car, the first thing a new car, I can't help but I have to touch it. And I think there's this quality that you will always have to touch it. So there'll always be a role for a model. How you achieve that model is a different question.
But at the moment, to achieve that model, they still need modelers.
Yes.
The CAD/CAM systems cannot, manufacture that as well.
It's very quick to change a clay model.
Yeah.
You can do it quite rapidly. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Mm.
Well, thank you very much, Anthony, and thank you very much, Peter.